Say, psst, you here? Confirmed. You are here, and you're tuned in to a personal interview with Tony Lyons on episode number 1085 of The Paul Leslie Hour. Welcome. Tony Lyons is Director of MAHA Action, or Make America Healthy Again Action, which is fighting for a healthier America. Tony's also President of Skyhorse Publishing, known for the boldest and most talked about titles around, from authors ranging from Woody Allen to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to Robert Malone and our friend Christina Bobb, which, by the way, are all past guests on this show. Well, it's time. Let us dive into this one. Tony Lyons awaits.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by Tony Lyons, the Director of MAHA Initiative, Make America Healthy Again, and the President of Skyhorse Publishing. You'll see a lot of beautiful books there behind him. I love that background. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I know a lot of those books very well. They're on that wall in my house. So
that's great.
How do those two worlds intersect? Being the Director of MAHA Initiative and being the President of a premier but controversial publisher?
Yeah, so many of the books that we do are by politicians. So, for example, I first published one of Bobby Kennedy's books in about 2014. It was called Thimerosal, Let the Science Speak. And I got to know him pretty well in that process. But I also learned a lot about how the system works and about how these companies, even 10, 12 years ago, were so blatantly prioritizing profits over people, over public health, and lying to the public about what the science is and what the impact of products are on consumers. So in the course of that, in those years since then, I've published so many books that get at that issue from different sides. And that has led me to want to be more and more political.
What concerns you the most about health in America?
Yeah, I would say that the most concerning question or problem is that so many products, whether it's pesticides, drugs, vaccines, food, or almost any other product, have become in this country delivery mechanisms for toxins. And there's no sort of government group, or there hasn't been up until this new chance we have starting this year with Secretary Kennedy, but also with President Donald Trump. So there's been nobody really protecting the American people. And it's all just been about maximizing profits. And it's all been about these big companies, these big pharma, big ag, big food companies coordinating with the government to just make as much money as they can possibly make, so that we, spend 2 to 3 times what any other industrialized country spends on public health per capita. And we have just these horrible health outcomes. So that's what I think the main problem is. And the way to solve it isn't really in banning products, but it's in having a more common sense approach. That one size fits all clearly doesn't work, that certain toxins shouldn't be in certain products, that we need more of a free market approach so that the government isn't in the business of protecting these companies from liability, which then encourages them to do things that nobody should want to do and that they wouldn't do if they had liability for them.
I spent quite a bit of time in Eastern Europe this year, and probably not a popular thing for me to say, but one of the first things that occurred to me was how much healthier everybody looked. And, it's supposed to be the United States of America. Is it the food?
Yeah, I think to a great extent, it's the food. Part of it is the attitude. But, if you look at what's happened to our country over the last, 20, 30, 40 years, it's that people don't think about nutrition. People don't leave the house. People don't exercise like they used to. So you've got all of these big companies working so hard to lie to the American public, to use propaganda to get them to do things that are bad for them. And then we have a government that is just working with them and not alerting the American public to the things that people ought to be doing, that rational people ought to want to do. Take a couple of mile walk each day, eat somewhat healthier foods so that the toxic load starts to go down, so that your nutrition level goes up, the use of all of your time, so that you spend a good amount of time outside, you spend some time working out, you think about the food that you eat. All of that together is going to lead to a much healthier population. We all know that. But then there are these terrible kind of crimes that have happened at specific times, like in 1986, where a bunch of pharmaceutical companies go to Washington, D.C. at a time when there are vaccines for 7 different viruses. And they basically say vaccines are incredibly dangerous. They use the term unavoidably unsafe. They've then given big donations to all of these different senators, and they've hired, this just incredible teams of lobbyists and PR people. And their first pitch is that vaccines are so dangerous that we're going to stop making them. So they're so dangerous, people are going to die from them. People are going to get brain damage. They're going to get neurological damage. They're going to have all kinds of problems. But the alternative is actually worse. That's what they were arguing. And so that they needed to be protected from the liability from these horrible products that they were making. And then as soon as they were able to convince Congress and Ronald Reagan to sign this act of Congress that gave them a total liability waiver from any product that they made that was called a vaccine, then they went from 7 viruses that they're vaccinating for to now people get 3 vaccines by the time they're 18 years old. So, and in certain states, it's more. So the harm to the public obviously went way, way up when there was no liability. And their claim was that it's, they're these crazy trial lawyers and that the trial lawyers are kind of ruining the whole system. But it was a bunch of companies that were making billions of dollars who just wanted to make even more money. And then they went to this huge number of vaccines, and simultaneously they hired all the same companies and bribed all the same politicians to go with this new narrative, which is that every vaccine ever created is incredibly safe and effective, and that they should, nobody should worry. We just need more and more of them. And if we don't have them, then there's this big sort of problem that millions of people are going to die in the streets because we don't have enough vaccines. It is kind of a fascinating process that they took in order to get to this point where we're supposed to believe that a whole class of products are safe and effective, even though most of them haven't been properly tested, haven't been tested with a double-blind, placebo-controlled test. And then, more than that, it's clear that nobody has thought through the combinations of vaccines, or, whether it's a good idea for all people to get the sort of same dosage and all of those kinds of things. And then nobody's looked at many of the combinations of adjuvants in so many different vaccines. So it's been a fascinating process. And what you see is that it really has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with being an anti-vaxxer or something like that. It's just this program to indoctrinate the American people. So in a case with something like the polio vaccine, there are 5 vaccines that all vaccinate for polio that are slightly better than a 6th one. But if you attack that 6th one and say that it was less well tested than the other 5, then you're called a crazy anti-vaxxer.
This is astonishing stuff. I just hope that, like what happened with our Naomi Wolf interview, that this doesn't get pulled from YouTube. But everybody out there, they can go to mahaaction.com MAHA Action.com. Also, you can find them on Facebook, Instagram, and on X. So what's the game plan for MAHA?
So I think that the game plan is to bring attention to all of these questions, that it's really not, it's not about vaccines. It's not specifically about pesticides. It's not about food. It's about all of these different delivery mechanisms. Like I said, that we can't have the American public getting thousands and thousands of chemicals in their food that are against the law all around the world. And in many cases are against the law in countries where they're manufactured. So they're products that are made in China where you can't sell those products or you can't use those ingredients in China, but China then sends them to the US where it's okay for our population to have these chemicals put into our children's bodies. So I think that the game plan is to make it clear, to fight back in the sort of marketplace of ideas and to explain to the public what's going on. And that, now the same kind of thing is happening with pesticides that happened in 1986 with vaccines, where they're basically saying pesticides are really dangerous. But if you don't have pesticides, you're not going to have enough food. So these are, they're like vaccines. They're saying, these are products that are unavoidably unsafe, but we need them, that the alternative is worse. And that's just not true. That's just a bunch of companies that are making billions of dollars at our expense, who want to make even more money. And there is technology and, there are changes in the world where we can actually do things better. And as a government and with, spending taxpayer dollars, we should want to know what those opportunities are, what the possibilities are. Because if you allow a big company, it doesn't matter what the product is, to make a product where the government has all the liabilities. So taxpayers have to pay for it. And then you deliver it to millions of people, but then Medicare and Medicaid has to pay for the chronic diseases that these people get. But that's just a bad deal. And the government shouldn't be in the business of propping up companies and allowing them to injure and to sicken the American public and then pay to try to treat all these disorders that have been created by these products.
Well, I have to imagine with as much heat as Robert F. Kennedy gets, I'm sure you get some of that shrapnel. Why do you think the resistance? I mean, you think it's just, I would have thought this is the most obvious thing in the world. We want a healthier citizenry. But if you watch TV or you look at social media, especially anytime Robert F. Kennedy Jr. makes a public statement or he's questioned, it's like he's the most dangerous person alive.
Well, he is a very dangerous person. So, he's a danger to a corrupt system that has been cheating the American public for decades now, and it's been getting worse and worse. So, if you think about it as he's going up against some of the most powerful people, some of the most powerful companies on the planet, you really can't expect them to just accept that. They want to keep this gravy train going, and they have a system in place that really works. But that system isn't good for us. And we have great scientists and great doctors who, if they had incentives to do a better job, to do something that actually benefited the American people, then I think we could get to a much lower toxic load for everybody in the country. And then you'd see chronic disease rates really going down. So I think there's a real opportunity to improve this country. And that's what we're really fighting for.
We've had the privilege of welcoming quite a few of the Skyhorse Publishing authors through the years. You're bringing great books to the masses. People can see them there. Do you have a story that you would perhaps, a little short quip that you would like to share with us about one of these authors? I see Woody Allen, Robert F. Kennedy, Melania Trump. Must be exciting work.
Yeah. I guess the story that I like best is the real Anthony Fauci story, where we're told that Bobby Kennedy is anti-science, and and there was a congressional hearing today where they're trying to make the point that the CDC was perfect before, and then Bobby Kennedy is going in there and firing some of these people who are these legendary scientists. So, it is just a fact that we've had these terrible health outcomes, worse, like you said, than anywhere on the planet. These people have not done a good job. Anybody with their eyes open recognizes that. So I look at what Bobby Kennedy did with the real Anthony Fauci. And so to say that he's anti-science, from a publisher's standpoint, he was looking over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies. He was coordinating with scientists and doctors and researchers all around the world to make sure that this book came out right. And I've never been involved in a bigger book, in a bigger production. It's an incredibly long book. It's about 220,000 words long. It's got 2,194 citations. So it's a book that was just incredibly well researched. And yet you see right away, even before it comes out, people say it's misinformation, it's dangerous, much of it's made up, but nobody points to anything in the book that's wrong. So for a book that's that high profile, a book that sells 1.4 million copies, you would think, well, if you're really going to come out publicly and say this is a dangerous book, you should kind of have to say why. And you should point to something and say, look, there are 300 studies that disprove that. But nobody did any of that. But I watched Secretary Kennedy work on this book day after day, 15 hours a day, 20 hours a day, up in the middle of the night, thinking through things, getting more scientists to take a look at a specific section to make sure that there were no errors. So, that's what science really is. And I think the American public has to recognize, has to learn that science is messy, that science is not, Dr. Fauci saying, I am science. Nobody is science. Science is a thousands and thousands of different scientists and doctors and researchers looking at something and wrestling with it and trying to get closer and closer to the truth. But there's no end to science. There's no end to the potential for greater clarity. And that's what we've been missing in the last few years, is that anti-science means you disagree with corporate science. And so much of science now is funded by the companies that make a profit from it. So that's what you really see with a book like The Real Anthony Fauci, that this was a book that's taking no prisoners, that there are no preconceptions that Bobby Kennedy went into when he wrote that he was learning as he did it, that he was recognizing that there could be a new study that would change how he viewed something. And that's what all scientists need to do. That's what all researchers need to do. That's what all politicians who want to talk about anything that's connected with science, that there is no end to science. It's just the best we can do now. And we want to be sure that it's not just science that's made up by companies that are going to make a ton of money based on a particular outcome. That science, we can't know the outcome beforehand. And many of these companies, they have an outcome that they really want. And they're going to do studies that bring us to that outcome, even if it poisons people.
I highly recommend The Real Anthony Fauci book. And my dear dad gave me that book. And it was such a great pleasure to hand that to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and have him sign it.
That's great.
So just real quick, I wanted to say hello to one of our listeners there at Kennedy's office, Gregory T. Angelo. He said that Richard Danker introduced you two and that you all talked for a while. So hello to Gregory. And Tony Lyons, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners and viewers before we part today?
Yeah, I would like to say that I'd like all of you to be open to the idea that you've been lied to, that you've been lied to at a very high level over a long period of time by the media, by your politicians, the books you read, the newspapers you read, the TV shows you watch, and that what's really happening now, I would argue, is a real attack on the status quo. And so it's an attack on fake science, on manufactured science that has failed the American people. And that I would hope that you'd really kind of get involved and be open to the idea that what's happening now for the first time in decades is real science. It's a fascinating period. It's an opportunity that we haven't had for decades, and that if we're not careful, will never have. So that this is kind of a tipping point. And then you can see the desperation in the media and in politicians and in calling congressional hearings to try to make Secretary Kennedy look bad. So look at this period that we're in and kind of get involved. Go to mahaaction.com, follow Secretary Kennedy on his X and Instagram and Dr. Oz and his entire team, and really get a handle on what's going on, because these people are not going to tell you the truth. They worry that they're going to lose a lot of money over the next few years, and they're not going to just accept that easily.
We have been lied to. That's for sure. Well, Mr. Lyons, thank you so much to you and your team. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Paul.
All right, sir. If I can ever be of service.
That would be great. Let's
All right.
talk.
We'll see you. Bye.
Now, the Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.